You were never taught how to trust yourself. You were taught how to perform, how to be liked, how to be manageable, but not how to be you. Somewhere along the way, you started mistaking betrayal for maturity. You said yes when you meant no. You smiled when you were breaking. You performed strength so well that people stopped seeing your pain at all. This video isn't about blaming anyone. It's about showing you the invisible moments where you stopped being real, because that's what survival demanded. These are 17 ways you were trained to betray yourself. If even 3 of these sting, you're ready to wake up. This one looks harmless, but underneath, it's chronic self-abandonment in disguise. You apologize to de-escalate tension, even when you didn't cause it, because somewhere in childhood, conflict became a threat to your safety. So now, your nervous system chooses peace over truth, every time. Carl Jung called this a defensive adaptation of the persona, a mask you build to keep the external world calm, even if it means turning on yourself. You don't say, "I'm sorry," to take accountability. You say it to make yourself smaller, less threatening, more lovable. You learn it. If I'm wrong, I'm safe. Because being right didn't save you, but being agreeable might have. This isn't kindness. It's obedience, coded as empathy. This one hurts, because you think it means you're mature, in control, above the chaos. But you're not in control. You're dissociated. You were taught that anger is dangerous, that it makes you unlikable, that it will get you punished, rejected, or called dramatic. So you learned to metabolize rage into a polite smile. But that smile is a betrayal, a mask, a mouth that silences the truth your body is screaming. Gabor Maté calls this the cost of emotional repression, where the body keeps the score because the soul is no longer allowed to speak. The world doesn't need more polite people. It needs people who are willing to feel fully, without shame. Smiling through anger is not strength. It's a survival reflex, one that turns your fire into self-gaslighting. This is how you learned to call disconnection kindness, to override your gut instinct in the name of not being difficult. You say yes to dinners you don't want to attend, projects that drain you, people who make you anxious, and you smile while doing it, because you're terrified of being seen as selfish. But that yes comes at a cost. Your nervous system pays it. Your creativity pays it. Your body pays it. This is what Jung meant when he said, a lie would make no sense unless the truth was felt dangerous. Your yes is a lie, but not to them, to you. You were trained to abandon your own truth just to keep someone else comfortable. But people who truly care about you don't need you to abandon yourself to feel okay. You don't just express your pain, you justify it. You give disclaimers, backstories, and reasons, not because you want to be understood, but because deep down, you don't believe your pain is valid unless it makes sense to them. You were taught that emotion must be earned, that it has to be packaged politely, to be tolerated. So now, you spend your life in emotional negotiations. I'm not mad, I'm just tired. I'm not hurt, I just wish things had been different. I'm fine, it's just been a long week. This is the childhood wound of justification. You learned that if you couldn't explain why you were sad, angry, overwhelmed, then you didn't deserve to be. And so you over-clarify your pain until it disappears, until they are comfortable again. But here's the truth. You do not need to explain your feelings to make them real. Jung would call this a distortion of authenticity, where the self is slowly edited for the comfort of the collective. You brush off compliments. You call your wins lucky. You shrink in rooms that are built to celebrate you. Why? Because visibility makes you feel exposed. Because somewhere along the line, you were taught that shining makes others uncomfortable, and that discomfort is your fault. This is the emotional hangover of herd morality, Nietzsche's idea that we've been conditioned to associate humility with goodness and pride with corruption. So instead of owning your power, you dull it. You sand it down. You learn to dim so others won't feel small. But every time you do that, you send your nervous system a dangerous message. My power is a threat. My worth must be hidden. My joy needs a filter. And eventually, you forget how to feel proud of yourself at all. But shrinking doesn't make people love you more. It just teaches them to overlook you, the same way you've been taught to overlook yourself. This is different than downplaying success. This is shrinking your presence, not just your accomplishments. You second-guess your voice. You question your ideas before they're spoken. You wait to see how others react before owning your truth. This isn't humility, it's survival. Because big rooms often mirror small childhood spaces, where being bold meant being punished, where speaking up meant tension, where attention wasn't safe, it was strategic. So now, when you're in spaces that require boldness, you dissociate. You default to careful, to polite, to invisible. Jung called this a repression of the inferior function. The parts of you that were never allowed to grow now show up weak or muted. But what if that silence isn't you being cautious? What if it's just the echo of a child who learned that visibility was dangerous? You're not small. You were just trained to make yourself so. We've only just finished number 6. If you already feel exposed, wait for number 11. You work late, you skip breaks, you grind until your eyes blur. And when your body whispers, enough, you call it weakness. Because somewhere along the line, you learned that rest is for the lazy, that pushing through pain is a virtue, that exhaustion means you're finally doing enough. But burnout is not discipline. It's your nervous system begging for relief and being ignored. Jung would say this is the shadow of the modern ego, the part of us that confuses over-functioning with value. That believes survival depends on how much we produce, not how deeply we live. And so, we betray ourselves with every "I'll rest when it's done." Every "I just need to push a little longer." Every moment we treat burnout like it's a badge instead of a warning. You weren't born to be productive. You were born to be present. We're not even halfway through, and if this already feels like it's describing your diary, keep watching. The later ones go deeper. Not because they've changed, but because you don't know how to hold your own anger without guilt. You forgive so you can stop feeling the tension, so the weight can lift, so the story ends clean. But forgiveness without accountability is just self-abandonment, dressed up in spiritual language. This is what Gabor Maté calls toxic compassion, when you've been trained to prioritize connection over truth. even with those who've harmed you. You convince yourself that forgiveness is noble, but deep down, it's a shortcut, a way to bypass the pain and say, "See, I'm the bigger person." But healing doesn't come from being big. It comes from being honest. Forgiveness is sacred, but it should never come at the cost of your dignity. This one is subtle and terrifying. You walk into a room and immediately sense what everyone needs you to be. Calm? You get quieter. Tense? You smile more. Someone's upset. You turn into a therapist. You shape-shift so quickly, you forget what you were feeling before you walked in. This is not empathy. It's emotional fusion, a trauma response that says, if I can manage their state, I'll be safe in mine. This is how many children of chaotic, critical, or emotionally volatile environments survive. By becoming the thermostat, the translator, the soother. Jung would call this an unconscious forfeiting of the self, a surrender to the collective to preserve attachment. But when you constantly adapt to others, you lose contact with your own truth, your own needs, your own reality. You stop existing for you, and only start existing for them. You say, "It's fine. I don't want to make a big deal out of it. They're going through more than I am. I can handle it." But what you're really saying is, my needs are inconvenient. My voice is a burden. This is learned neglect. It doesn't always come from abuse. It comes from subtle but repeated signals that your pain was always second to their work, their moods, their crisis. And now when something hurts, you look for reasons why it's not valid instead of reasons to speak it. Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." But you've been trained to filter yourself first. So you walk through life with a mute button in your throat, editing your needs into silence, just to stay easy to love. This one doesn't show up as fear. It shows up as relief when you're overlooked. You sit at the back. You hesitate before unmuting. You let the moment pass rather than take the spotlight. And part of you calls that humility. But it's not. It's hiding. You learned that attention wasn't safe. It came with strings, with judgment, with expectation, with punishment for getting it wrong. And so now, you mistake invisibility for safety. But staying small doesn't protect you. It only ensures that your true self never gets tested or seen. Nietzsche wrote about slave morality, where we confuse caution with virtue and begin to moralize our fear. But there is no morality in disappearing from your own life. There's only the echo of a person who was never told you're allowed to take up space. This next one is subtle, and most people never catch it. You scroll, you snack, you shop, you clean the kitchen again. You open the same app for the 11th time in 1 hour. But you're not distracted, you're disconnected. This is the modern mask of emotional repression. You've been taught that feeling too much makes you unstable, that naming your grief makes you a downer, that softness is weakness, that stillness is laziness. So you stay busy, or productive, or fine. But underneath the noise is a truth your body still knows. You are hurting, you are tired, you are numbed, not healed. Gabor Maté says trauma isn't what happened to you. It's what happens inside you when you are alone with what happened. You numb because you were never taught to hold pain, only to escape it. We're now entering the heaviest stretch of the video. Points 13 to 15. These go beyond behavior into deep patterning, revealing how self-betrayal becomes a belief system, not just an emotional reflex. You plan everything. You rehearse conversations in your head. You overthink texts. You scan rooms for danger before your body even walks in. This isn't self-awareness. This is hypervigilance with a pretty name. And at some point, you started confusing it with being responsible, being prepared, being mature. But Jung would say this is the ego clinging to order, because chaos was once unlivable. So your mind became a fortress, a constant strategist, a bodyguard that never sleeps. Control is how you survived, when no one else protected you. But control doesn't equal safety. It just postpones fear. You don't need to control everything to be safe now. You need to learn how to feel safe without control. That's what healing actually is. You feel the red flag and rationalize it. You hear the whisper and override it with logic. You feel the truth and wait for someone else to confirm it. Because your inner voice was never enough. You were taught that authority came from the outside, from the teacher, the coach, the parent, the partner. So now you defer. You ask for advice you don't need. You look for proof, permission, or perspective, just to override the truth you already knew. This is Jung's disintegration of the self, when the inner world becomes so censored, so undermined, that the only voice we trust is someone else's. But your intuition was never broken. It was just buried, under years of external validation, under fear, under learned helplessness. You don't need more advice. You need to trust what you already know. This next one is the reason you feel exhausted even when nothing is wrong. You soften your tone. You backpedal mid-sentence. You say, "I don't know. Maybe it's just me," before offering a powerful idea. Why? Because your voice was punished before it was ever developed. Maybe not through yelling, but through dismissal, correcting, mocking, interrupting, excessive correction masked as help. So you learned to make your truth more digestible, to coat it in sugar before anyone had to taste it, to whisper the things you should be shouting. But every time you shrink your voice, you confirm a lie. My words only have value when they're comfortable. My clarity is only safe if it's soft. My power must be diluted before it's allowed. Jung said, "A voice does not have to be loud to be powerful, but it must be real." And yours has never stopped being real. It's just been trained to whisper. Let's finish strong. These final points, 16 and 17, are the emotional crescendo. They mark the shift from personal suppression to full-blown identity distortion. You call it compromise, but you always do the shrinking. You call it grace, but you're always the one who bends. You call it love, but it only works when you're not fully yourself. This is the final evolution of self-betrayal, when you believe you are easier to love if you're edited. Because somewhere along the way, love became conditional. It came with rules, tones, consequences. And so now, even in adulthood, love feels like something to earn. You monitor your tone, shrink your joy, soften your boundaries, and you tell yourself you're being thoughtful. But what you're really doing is abandoning the parts of you that won't fit their version of love. Jung said the greatest burden a child can carry is the unlived life of the parent. You were shaped into someone they could understand, but you were never meant to be understood. You were meant to be yourself. You'll know number 17, because it's the one you've normalized the most. You tiptoe around the truth. You edit your joy. You hide your pain. You smile in rooms where you want to scream. You listen to be liked, not to be known. And all of it comes from this one idea, that your worth is tied to other people's comfort. But comfort is not connection. And being palatable is not the same as being safe. This is what Jung meant when he warned against over-identification with the persona. When the mask becomes so comfortable, we forget we're wearing one. Your job is not to make people feel okay. Your job is to stop betraying yourself, to manage their discomfort. The more you contort yourself for others, the less of you there is left to come home to. Which of the 17 hit you the hardest? Drop the number in the comments, and let's see how many of us are healing the same wounds. You weren't broken, you were trained. Trained to be likable, trained to be polite, trained to be good. But in that training, you were taught to mistrust yourself, to reject your instincts, to silence your rage, to shapeshift for approval. But here's the truth. Self-betrayal isn't your fault. It was your strategy, the one that got you through, the one that made you safe, until now. Because now you're waking up. Now you see it. And what is seen can be reclaimed. You don't have to apologize for taking up space. You don't have to earn rest. You don't have to shrink just to be chosen. You don't need to betray yourself to belong anymore. You're allowed to be whole, not liked, not polished, whole. And that is where your healing begins. If this resonated, continue on your journey with our next video. I'll see you there.